Welcome to the Change Up in Podcast. My name is Gerard Uselli, and this episode is very special in its own right, and I'm going to tell you why. Because we've been doing the Essential series for the last 8 episodes, and for the essentiality that has been provided for all the guests that we've spoken to throughout the last 8 weeks, what's been interesting in this case is I wanted to change up the outcomes and bring on someone that I've been working with in a very exclusive right on a cartoon. I'm just going to leave it at that. But nonetheless, I have a very good guest of mine, Erick Miles Goldsmith. Erick, how are you today?
I am very excited to be here. I am very excited to be a part of what you've created, for sure.
Thank you so much. So my first question for you in a traditional standpoint compared to other guests that have been on is what your childhood was like growing up.
My childhood was very much one I think about, certainly a lot more than I used to in the last 4 years, just being at college and away from it. Um, I grew up in a house with a lot of siblings. I have 4 blood-related siblings, and then my mom, it's her passion to foster care kids with the intent to adopt. So again, the house was always full, and it was a single parent household with my mom. We something we always did as a family, without a doubt, was laugh, have a lot of fun, and just that was very constant in our household as well. So me myself, I'm without a doubt an innate introvert. So in growing up in school, I was definitely more shy kid. But I always had a lot to say and share, for sure. Yeah.
That has an interesting standpoint on it because I feel like when you're more of a quiet type, and as I could somewhat relate to you in this perspective, when you take a step back and observe things around you, you're able to really rationalize what's in front of you. And if something speaks to your conscious, you're able to approach it in a way where you're speaking from something that both parties have experienced.
hmm Yeah, I would agree with that. I talk to, because I'm also an admission counselor currently, full time. I talk to families about this all the time when relating how I experienced my first few weeks of college. In that, growing up, I was very much a listen. I feel like I was bred to listen. I was a great listener. But again, being that introverted person, I didn't know how to talk about myself, but I was always so very adept at watching other people and just be trying to be very empathetic and like you said, observant of what's going on and why people are feeling the way they're feeling. So yes, I would agree with that.
I think to also tie this in relating to your acting career and where it started for you in that retrospect, how was that transitional period, even though you have these personality traits to make you a little bit more quiet, like what was it like to really step into the realm of putting yourself out there in front of so many people?
Hmm. That transitional period for me took place at the beginning of college, literally the first weekend of college, actually. Um, and going from being an introvert to being on a stage, it really sparked off when I realized how theater, but also acting can be such a underrated avenue for communication. And when I learned you could so comfortably and accessibly do that through, whether it's even if it's simply writing, if you're a writer, if you're an actor speaking the words and the experiences of someone else that you can relate to, you can not only speak their story, but also speak yours. So when I realized I could do that, it was just a hop, skip, and a jump for me to really allow myself to try and get into that. So for me, high school, I was in stage crew for all 4 years of school, and I got into that because I was a huge academic. I wanted to get into this benefits program, and you needed to be in a group. And I did stage crew. College came, and I went in as a criminology and Spanish co-major. So I was looking for a school that had a great crim program as well as a great theater program. Wanted to continue stage crew. My first week, I meet the guy, Jeff Lentz, professor at the school, and I shake his hand, and he's like, "Oh, so you're interested in our program? Is that right?" And I tell him yes, and he's like, "Oh, so you're trying to get on stage? Is that it?" And I tell him, "No, no, 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 no. I'm I
That's
am a
funny.
I'm a backstage guy." And he gave me this look and I didn't realize it until a year or two later, that he had seen something in me that I hadn't at that point in time. So either he saw the future, or he very much inspired it within me, because he told me about that weekend, a 24-hour theater experience that all the theater people on campus were a part of. And I decided to go, and we got into this black box theater, and there were maybe 50 of us in the room, and we were divided into groups of about 5 to 6 of us, and the roles of actor, director, writer, costume were all assigned, and you couldn't choose your role, but I was given the role of an actor. So literally within 24 hours, we cobbled together a show. We learned our lines, got casted, of course, and then we put it on by that time the next night. And I absolutely loved it. It just, again, to be able to experience what it's like to be someone else besides myself, someone who's not as reserved, or someone who's not as introverted, and to be able to live that through them, made it very much aware to me that me being able to do that, it's not as big of a gap as I am allowing it to be. So, yeah.
I think in that retrospect too, something that I find interesting, especially going more in depth as far as what you've done throughout your career. When did you start to realize that you had a platform to get messaging across to people who feel like they needed to learn something more than what was presented to them?
It really takes place during all of the talkbacks. I'd say after shows is when I first saw it. We would, of course, do our show. Cast would come to the edge of stage and talk to the audience, whoever decided to remain. And of course, it depends on the show, whether you're doing a show with more heavier topics or even the lighter ones, when audience members, complete strangers visiting us from all over, would raise their hand and relate a story of their own. How something that took place on stage reminded them of this time in their childhood when they experienced something that they felt was wrong, or something they felt they shouldn't have done, and how that has affected them later on through their life, and how being able to see it in this moment has touched them. Moments like that, just again and again and again, in realizing that, again, that is something that we can do with theater, with art, which is so very based in communication. um, I decided that I wanted to do that for other people, and I wanted to do that for myself as well. So I continued acting. I began to start writing. um, I'm much more still getting to the table in terms of my writing pursuits, but I've got one piece that I had published, and it to hear the feedback from other people about it feels like I'm doing something that is beyond myself.
I can sense that. I can sense that very easily in how you've done things over time for yourself as well. Because one thing that I could just tell about you in just the process of working with you, I always respect people if things are directly going towards them as far as how things are directed, how they're targeted, how it's marketed. You will
Mhm.
always be the first one to raise a hand and ask the questions needed. And that's something that a lot of people don't do. And it's something I can really have a lot of respect for you for.
I try. I really, I certainly try. It's a lot of the times when I'm asking these questions, it's not coming from me, or if it's something that I could use clarification for, I'm also thinking that, if I'm thinking this, there's got to be other people thinking this. So it certainly is something that, I can remember being less comfortable and confident in raising my hand, which should not feel like such a gargantuan task as it
Yeah, I
does.
echo that too.
It, but it can be at different times for different people, and if I can alleviate that or jump through that hoop for someone, I certainly do love to do that. I truly believe my job on this earth is to help people, and that's not even going towards religion or anything else. I just truly believe that I feel the most productive and the most whole when I'm doing that,
Well,
for sure.
it also assembles a sense of therapeutic outlet for people like
Mm.
you, and even in this case, more for myself too. When you're not so much entrenched, but you're engaged in other people's lives and conversations, you start to think to yourself, yes, I have my own life to worry about, but then also, how is my life a spear point to help other people amid their processes to get to where they need to be? That way, you take what you've learned from those situations of other people and see what can be implemented in your life compared.
Mm. Yeah. Yes, I would without a doubt concur. See, this is another thing about just talking to people, is that you learn so many things. And maybe even a step below learning, you just realize things that were there in your view, but we feel like we're always thinking of everything that we might have to think about. But then someone comes in and they're like, "Hey, what about this?" And you're like, your whole mind expands and
Yeah.
you're like, "Oh my gosh." Yeah. So oh, it blows my mind. I feel like because of that, people often describe me as someone who's appreciative or happy with the simple things. And I feel like it's definitely a skill to take appreciation in the smaller details, but it's so rewarding, I think.
Absolutely. And to kind of put yourself in a little bit more of what you're doing today, especially as you've mentioned before, being an admissions counselor, like what's it like to work for a school that you went to?
Mm. It is, it's very, um, it's almost like, once again, I'm expanding my view. I Something else I say a lot. I'm a big fan of metaphors. When they work, they're great. So I really do feel like in this specific instance is that we live almost on an onion, right? An onion that has so many layers. And yeah, it's the onions that have the layers, right? Wow, now I'm
Yep,
not even sure. Yeah. It's
I
the
got you.
onion. We're living on an onion, and there's so many layers, and so often we feel like, we've gone through the first five or six, right? And we're like, that's all there is. How much more can there be? But there's always more. So being a student there for 4 years, as someone who wore so many hats, I was involved in so many things. I was an RA. I was obviously a student. I was in the theater programs. I was volunteering for everything I could. I was experience event monitoring. I was active in so many different areas in circles. But then after I graduated and I was looking for work and I became an admission counselor, I met these people who I work with now that have told me that, yeah, we've been here for 10, 15 years. And I'm thinking to myself, I was everywhere on campus. I never saw you. I never saw the inside of this office. Um, so for me, being here as a student, I'm learning more about the deeper layers of this onion and how it's just simply giving me an even greater understanding as to what my school, Albright College, how truly beneficial it is. And great it is, but also at the same time, how, you know, I don't want to give off this impression that it's this, you know, oasis or utopia for undergraduate students. You know, I think that everywhere in life there's people or ideas that you don't vibe with, and there are those at Albright. However, what I have experienced there is that both as a student and then as a full-time faculty member is that, or employee, is that this is a school where there is constantly more good trying to outweigh its bad. And
That's the key to success, to be honest with you, because there's always going to be bad.
exactly. And you can feel it. If you're open to it, you can feel where that scale lies in different places. You really can. You can feel when it feels like there's less hope. And you can feel when you feel like there's opportunity, and there's just, it's just, we're just waiting for someone to do something with it. So to be there working, it's definitely a greater understanding as to the fortune that I've had to be able to attend there my 4 years of undergraduate school.
Also, to add to that, because I noticed you graduated yourself in 2020.
I
Now,
did.
in that time frame, especially amid a pandemic, what was change like for you, considering that you graduated that year and where you are today?
For me, it was, I feel like compared to most people, I had a slightly different experience just because we were about a quarter way through our senior year at the time. And that's when the news came out that, you know, everyone has to leave school. And I specifically chose to stay working on campus. Um, so I actually stayed on there for about 3 or 4 months. Um, and as a result of that, I watched everyone that I knew for almost 4 years leaving, but I was still there on campus. And I was every single day. So it felt a bit like a ghost town for sure.
Right.
Uh, but after that, you know, again, still being there with several others who remained, it felt to me almost as though things hadn't really changed other than the fact that people had left. But that's when, you know, keeping attention to the news, I saw that right outside these four walls, things were very much different. They were getting very, very drastically bad. um and then, you know, as time went on, I had the realization that, or not the realization, but I understood that things, you know, I was getting calls and messages from outside family members of people explaining how it was making contact with them, how people were getting sick, how people were dying, and how this was something that affects everyone. So for me, once again, this change, it felt like I needed to do something, because for me, I sort of grew up with the mentality that, you know, again, going back to my childhood, we always had fun, but something we didn't do at home was talk about our feelings. We didn't talk about our fears or our doubts. And again, so we were sort of raised with this mentality that if something, you feel something is wrong, do something about it, fix it. um, and for better or for worse, that's something that I'm still working with now. But so in the middle of the pandemic, I just felt this, I was scared, I was angry, I was frustrated, but mostly I felt this urge to do something about it. And where I was in my life at the time, I didn't feel safe, and I didn't have the logistical opportunity to go out to the protests. And that's referring to the Black Lives Matter protests. I couldn't go to protests. I couldn't do a lot of things that I felt like everyone else around me was doing. But for me, I thought, what can I do from here? And that's when I realized it's, everyone can help in their own way. If it happens to be in your way to go to a protest, do it. If If it happens to be your way to write 1,000 letters to the people that you can't see right now, do it. But for me, I chose to create. And I sat, and for the first, that's really when I got into videography. And I made several really short films, just trying to speak to what was happening. Um, and that really helped me feel like I was doing something, but also helping whoever would see it. So that was really my biggest adjustment.
I think that's a very proactive way of going about things. And it's something I commend you for, because there's a very high possibility where the things around you, of course, become compromised just based on natural action. And then also in hindsight, how that impairs your future over time. And everyone's story is different, but it's good to know with certain people that people like you are able to channel a story and make it something of relative continuity to where you are today.
Yeah.
Also, in the retrospective of it all, I wanted to also ask you, how do you ration the moments you live in versus the desires you chase?
I think so. I'll answer that by saying where I'm currently at, and then where I wish to be, and how I bridge that gap for sure. So I am currently a full-time admission counselor at Albright College, my alma mater, um, and I'm getting to travel and connect and tell stories to different people, helping them bridge the gap to undergraduate education, which completely changed my life in so many great ways. Um, and I'm doing that full time. I'm living in my own apartment for the first time. I'm paying all my bills, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to do that all on time. That's where I currently am. It's a pretty great place where I know I'm going to be, and where I'm working to be is a storyteller full time. Someone who is able to, whether it's through acting, writing, videography, or all of the above, or even things I haven't thought of yet. I want to speak for people who, like me, didn't grow up being encouraged to do so, not encouraged to talk about what they're feeling, not feeling that openness around you. I want to be able to speak for them. I want to be able to speak also for myself. I want to be able to let people know that there is so much more possibility in the world than you think there is right now. So that's where I want to be, full time working to do that. Um, how am I going to get there? I think I'm very much learning that life is, it comes to you as it comes to you. I'm
Very
definitely
much so. It's
it
so true.
there's so many songs that talk about, you can make all the plans you want, and then things change, and it can be in the snap of a moment. And it really can. I never imagined I'd be where I am today a year ago, 2 years ago, three. Um, so I guess I have a collection of very loosely laid plans. That
Which honestly is a highlight of how realistic it could all be. Because
exactly.
to be honest with you, and not to be so redundant about it, like you literally said it perfectly as far as just how people desire for much more in the future. And the issue with it all is that you literally could be hit with something in the next moment and you have no idea. So you always have to ration out. And again, that's why I love using the two sides of my brain in my background, because it really tells the story for how people think versus the actions that come around them.
Mm. Ah, this is good, Gerard. You know what? In high school, I loved having conversations just like this, but not everyone was at a place where they could, for a number of reasons. So Yes, I'm very much enjoying this right now.
Definitely. And something to add as a final point, because you talked a lot about change. You talked a lot about as far as the desires of where you want to be in a loose pattern. Now, also, maybe not. I've covered this with you already, but let's see, what's the biggest change you want to see for yourself?
I I would like to certainly feel as though I'm more confident in myself. And that said, I should specify more specifically in my ability to begin something, and get it beyond the conceptual stage all the way to fruition, because that is something that I have done my entire life, from planning to orchestration. I have done that, but I feel as though I've certainly done that through collaboration and teamwork, even if it's my own solo projects. The idea, and I feel like this is just genuinely true, is that when you're around other creatives, it's an energy or a motivation or an influence, whatever we choose to call it, that is unlike anything a non creative individual. And by that I mean, everyone's got their own sort of artistic forms of expression, but people who are creating in general, it's something that's it propels me. Since leaving college, and I am only a year and a few months out, so maybe I'm still adjusting, but I feel as though that is something that I've certainly craved, is that external sort of gas or motivation, whatever we choose to call it. So I'm looking to hopefully find within myself that ability to do it internally, but also just feel more confident also in what others say they see in me. Because
Yeah,
I
very
yeah.
compelling to say the least.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
nonetheless, I just wanted to say this as a one-off episode of the Change of Him podcast. That is pretty much a first sense of reunion going back to what the platform was initially brought up upon. This has been a very nice way to alter the concentration of the Essential series, and a very nice standard as far as bringing it back to what it is going to be. So, Erick,
Mhm.
I wanted to thank you very much for joining me today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. I wish you the same.
Absolutely. Bye bye.